This podcast is brought to you by LiveIntent. Google's deprecation of third-party cookies continues to loom over us, putting future revenue growth in doubt. LiveIntent's Hero, that's helping identity reveal opportunities, offers a solution by transforming non-addressable audiences into addressable inventory using first-party data. Hero is scalable, interoperable, and integrated with major industry players, providing a robust framework for navigating the post-cookie era. See how Hero can help you quickly unlock your cookieless inventory at liveintent.com/hero. That's liveintent.com/HIRO. Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. I'm Ari Paparo. I'm joined today by Eric Franchi. Eric, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hey, everybody.
And our special guest, Rob Leathern. So I've known Rob for probably 10 plus years. Probably many of our listeners have met with him at some point. He has an amazing career in some of the topics that most of us try to avoid. So he was the senior director at Facebook Meta for business integrity. So that's a lot of ad quality, ad transparency type things. And more recently, he was the vice president product for Google for privacy, which is a weighty position. And now he's an independent consultant, tinkerer, startup guy. Rob, did I do you justice there?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. Yeah, for sure. It's really great to be here and glad to be able to chat about some of these weighty topics with you.
Yeah, we're going to find out how Rob's car was spying on him, so stay tuned for that. So next week is July 4th. We have a special episode. We're going to do Justify Your Existence, which is everyone's favorite startup interview format, and then Eric and I will be back the following week. I also want to point out that on Marketecture.tv, we have a great vendor interview with AppsFlyer that Eric Seufert conducted, one of the major measurement providers in the mobile space. Really interesting conversation. And it's free behind the paywall until Monday.
AppsFlyer, there's a rumor that they're going to go public.
Interesting.
Yeah. And apparently it's a $400 million business.
Wow, that we didn't cover that in the interview. So you should listen to it if you're an investment banker or otherwise interested.
Yeah, you can't comment on that stuff when you're a company, but it's out there. You can read it on Bloomberg and elsewhere.
Cool. I didn't know that. All right. Let's jump in with Rob. So what are you up to since you left Google?
Well, like probably a lot of startup or former startup people have been playing around a lot with generative AI, various APIs and tools. And yeah, I've kind of been funding my own experimentation in that area. It's been very interesting. And we can kind of talk a little bit more about that if it's of interest. And then I've been consulting, advising some companies, some privacy, some safety, some general product stuff, some, general Silicon Valley stuff. So just kind of a broad range of different things. I've been keeping busy, but it's certainly been an interesting time for sure.
Important to keep busy. You should start a podcast like everybody else.
I've thought of it. Some people have tried to convince me to do that, but I haven't gone there yet.
Very easy to start a podcast. Very hard to continue it. So there's been a lot of news at Google. So I believe the chief privacy officer, I don't know if that was his exact title, but he left recently and they announced they weren't going to replace him. How does that, can you give us some context on what's going on there?
So the company, Google, just said that it is essentially doing that and it's, distributing privacy more throughout the company. That was already something that happened around the time I was leaving. We're moving some folks around. There were already a bunch of teams at the company that had their own safety, security, privacy teams. And so, unlike Meta, where it was greatly centralized, Google was a very distributed company to begin with. And they just, as part of this, the privacy teams have been federating a little bit more. So they actually talked about that publicly. And that happened when I was there as well. And so part of my team moved to other parts of the company and just to align with the privacy problem that one part of the business has might be quite different than another part. So I think from one perspective, it definitely makes sense.
Yeah, that does seem to make sense. I know I've heard from people who worked at Google that they felt like they were being sort of held back by the bureaucracy in some cases. So not just privacy, but also legal, regulatory, et cetera. And so distributing is one way to speed things up.
Yeah, and I think one way people have asked me about this, questions like, what's it like working at Meta versus Google and what's different? And I think, Google is just much more distributed. It's much, groups are much more independent. There aren't in the case of Meta, often there would be, shared points where you could escalate to get decisions made in a more timely fashion. That's just a different way of working and doesn't quite translate to Google. And so I think it makes sense from their perspective historically.
Do you think you could give us some insights into how Google thinks about privacy? Are they strict, doctrinaire about privacy? Are they balancing the interests of the business side or something else?
I think in a lot of Valley companies, and I'd say Google's especially this, I think folks do feel like they should be able to be seen as good on privacy, even, when it is in some cases, there are places where it runs counter to their business model. Like there's a certain amount of data that you need, not just, for example, to target ads, but also to keep advertisers and publishers protected from bad actors, right? You need to know, is this the same IP address that I'm seeing that has this person who's, showing me 10,000 impressions in a second? That doesn't make sense. So, but I think a lot of the people who work on these problems also want to feel like they're doing the right thing. When I think about how the different companies think about this, I think everyone wants to do the right thing. And I think in most cases, these bigger companies are going to do the right thing far more frequently than smaller businesses are. They're under so much more scrutiny. They're having to talk to regulators. They're having to really be buttoned up on this stuff. And so that said, they're also seeing, people look for, especially reporters and other folks, look for places where they're not doing the right thing. And you're always going to find those. There's always going to be those. So I think it's kind of one of those ones where sometimes even employees at the companies look at the articles in the news in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and say, well, are we doing the right thing? Are we really protecting people? And so I think the way a lot of people at Google that I've worked with and talked to about it have seen it as, well, technology is the way we can do better at this stuff. We can build privacy preserving technologies, not only for ourselves, we can open source them. My team, when I was working at Google, our team open sourced a whole bunch of privacy preserving technologies. We open sourced a VPN. We open sourced homomorphic encryption, private tokens, a bunch of different technologies that we think can make the world more private. And I think if I think about folks in the Valley, I think many of them think, well, we can have technology help solve this problem. But as you know, it's not always a technology problem. There's a lot of people problems embedded in these. So,
right. How do the ordinary line product managers and engineers get all this stuff? Like you said, we know we want to do the right thing, but it's kind of easy to know what the wrong thing is, but it's sort of hard to know what the right thing is in some cases. Is there an educational aspect to this? Are there guidelines that people get through training?
I think there is very much an educational, conversational aspect. And one of the things, again, talking about it's always hard to talk about the differences between two different big companies, but one thing that I enjoyed at Meta that I think also has gone down a little bit because of some of the scrutiny and the leaks and things is that the culture of internal discussion about stuff. And I know that this was also maybe in prior years a bigger thing at Google, but in latter years maybe hasn't happened quite as much. But at Meta, folks will post on Workplace, they'll post kind of pieces where they talk about how they see these things developing. And I think it's really important because reasonable people are going to disagree on the right approach to have a lot of those conversations. I just feel in latter years, not at all these companies, some of that conversation and that process of, ICs and engineers and product managers and other folks coming together and kind of debating what the right approach is has been somewhat reduced because it just feels risky to have these conversations. To write stuff down in some cases feels like it could be criticized publicly. So I feel like we've lost a little bit of that in the latter years, to be honest.
The hottest topic in privacy, I guess, as it relates to Google is the sandbox. Were you involved in the sandbox? And do you have a general sort of opinion about that direction of the browsers having APIs and producing sort of privacy enhancing technologies?
Yeah. So, I was somewhat involved in this, but I'd say it was more the case, as with many things, where we were helping facilitate certain kinds of conversations between teams, where those teams really had to figure out how to do things between themselves. And so, I think I wouldn't say I was as deep in this as some of the people who are working on this every day, the Alex Cohns of the world who are, living and breathing this for better or worse every single day. That said, a lot of the underlying technologies and things that help facilitate some of these things are things that my team and I worked on. So, for example, some of the stuff around IP address obfuscation and private tokens and some of those things were things that we were actively working on and the team, is still working on. And I think it's really important. I think these technologies are really important. I think there's a lot of folks out there who are doing things that whether they are intending to be used for bad purposes or just they may be, certain kinds of fingerprinting, kind of user re-identification, privacy leaks, data leaks, etc. I think there's just a lot of data out there that's, we need better technologies to protect people, from the negative uses. And so I think it's really important for companies to adopt these technologies. It's really important for big companies to set the tone and to take steps there, even when it may reduce some of their revenue and limit some of their opportunities in the short term.
Well, there's two different things there. There's big companies being leaders on privacy. And then there's companies like Google and Apple who are gatekeepers that are sort of forcing an entire ecosystem to comply with their opinions about privacy.
Yeah, for sure. No, there's no doubt.
So do you think it's a proper role for browser companies to be doing this sort of thing?
I think it is. I look, in some ways, Apple really started this with ITP, with tracking protection and some of the stuff on Safari, and a bunch of other browsers did this as well. And obviously this is something that you want to have no less of a set of protections in your browser, especially if it's the largest one. So that makes a ton of sense. So I think it is an important role because that's essentially the way people interact with the internet. That's how they think of it. So I do think it's important that you provide those protections. But I do also think that there's a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that people don't understand that ultimately could hurt not just users, but publishers and advertisers as well, which is around anti-fraud and abuse protections that have been built in and could be done in different ways in some cases. But literally, these are like things that have existed for over a decade and stop ad fraud or prevent ad fraud or keep it at a manageable level. And those things also need to be understood and supported in the browser and in the other related technologies.
Rob, how much do you pay attention to ad tech these days as it relates to targeting and cookies and no more cookies and all of that stuff?
Look, I think 3 or 4 times in my career, I've wanted to be like paying less attention to ads, and I always get pulled back into it. So I wrote a post at one point, something like how I explained to my kids I spent a decade in online ads, and then like I spent 15 years, 18 years. I don't know how many years it is now, but I do kind of keep getting pulled back into it. But I actually think the way I get pulled back into it these days is more of the, someone trying to hire a VP of engineering and like I make a connection and like I seem to be okay at doing that. And it's worked out for some of those folks. But I'd say like there's people who are just far more into details these days. This stuff has gotten so specialized and complex. So I'd say, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest, Eric.
You mentioned IP addresses. I want to put you on the spot. What's the over-under on IP addresses disappearing from the ad tech landscape, time-wise?
I'd love them to disappear, to be honest. But again, it's going to be hard to make them disappear. I mean, the example I use for people is I don't know if you saw that article. I don't know if it was in Wired or something about the Epstein Island and like the data tracking where all the people went after they went to the island. And I just use that as an example. I'm like, should this stuff exist in 5-10 years? I don't think so, but will it probably still exist in some form? I'd say it's probably more likely than not it will still exist for quite some time.
Right. The practicalities of removing the IP address are quite complicated, and it's not Google's sole decision. They can do it in Chrome, but that won't matter on, say, your TV. All right. So I want to talk about ad transparency, which is, I think, a subject we don't really talk about enough because it's very much tied to the social media companies. What's the end goal of ad transparency effort, or what should be the end state, in your opinion, of how much transparency there is about what ads are running where?
My belief is that there should be enough transparency that, and I don't think everyone needs to have access to all of the data. There's there's a lot of it. So I could see it being researchers, nonprofits, et cetera, doing this latter part. But I think you should be able to see any ad. You should be able to see some sense of how it's targeted. You should have the ability to see who's behind the ad, et cetera, for any ad that you would find. But then I think for some of these researchers, they should be able to actually have a sample size so they could actually understand the general nature of the ads running on these platforms. The latter is something we don't have today. So I wrote an article about this recently, which was we would just need a large enough random sample of all of the ads. All the ads are transparent for most of these platforms at this point, but you can't actually do any kind of calculation on this stuff. So I actually think there's like a really interesting opportunity to, process and look at what the denominator is. Like I couldn't tell you today how many ads are violating the policies of these big platforms. If I had a random sample of, say, 50,000 ads in the UK every day running on, Meta's platform, I probably could tell you with some degree of accuracy, like what the violation rate is.
When you say violation, give us some color. What are the violations you would look for if you're a researcher?
So I would say, you can look at the ad policies that each of these companies have. Like, for example, we don't allow gambling ads, or we don't allow cryptocurrency ads for, companies that don't have a money transmitter license, whatever it is. It could be quite specific. It could be quite general. But you'd probably choose some subset of those policies and you'd figure out if these ads are violating those companies' policies or violating a subset of policies that you think these companies care about and would create bad outcomes for individuals. It could be payday loan ads that aren't supposed to be running. It could be ads that use celebrities and pretend that they're dead. It's like a lot of stuff. But I actually think what some of the experimentation I've done around using LLMs are pretty good at figuring out if stuff shouldn't be running as an ad and violates the policies of those platforms.
Why are the platforms still allowing violations? It seems like, unlike content, which has sort of an infinite amount of content, the ads are being paid for. They go through a very specific workflow. It seems like it should be possible to eliminate creative violations at a platform, even as large as Meta. Tell me why I'm wrong.
The scale is quite substantial. So it's quite different, and it's a highly adversarial space. So, these companies, the bad actors who are trying to get ads through, because some of the bad ads are so profitable for them, they have a lot of resources to put a ton of effort into this. Those resources extend to stealing accounts, creating lots of accounts, figuring out billing thresholds where they can run ads for free before you try to charge their credit card. Like there's so many of these sub-problems that make it actually exceedingly difficult to do a good job at this. The only way you could really stop it would probably be to not allow the ad to run unless you confirm that the advertiser and the ad are good. That's not what these companies do. They typically, it's not that your ad is approved to run, even though it might say that. It's like your ad is not disapproved, would be a better way to think about it.
Can you give us a guesstimate on how many new creatives are published in the Facebook platform per day?
I could give you a very good guesstimate, but I'd probably get in trouble for doing so.
6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures?
Look, I think these companies have all said things like, we have millions of advertisers. So I think it's fair to say there's millions of advertisers that each of these companies has. And so add some multiple on top of that per day, deflated by some amount of inactive advertisers. But it's a very, very large number.
Okay. Your car was spying on you. How does this happen to you? You're a privacy expert, and you happen to be the person who's the victim of a Snoopy Toyota. What's going on?
Yeah, so I happened to tweet about this. I got some email about getting approved for some car insurance thing based on my driving history. I'm like, I would never have agreed to that. So then I start researching it, and I figure out that when I bought my car and wanted to get off the dealer lot very quickly, the dealer sales rep, they're all, as I understand it, very incentivized for you to sign up for this service because the company wants you to do this. They get paid by insurance companies, et cetera. And so I ended up opting into this. And you can get your driving data from these companies. And so in my case, in Toyota's case, they have created a subsidiary that's a fair credit reporting entity that provides you the equivalent of like an Experian, kind of credit history, but it's just your driving history. And so I actually got an Excel spreadsheet with hundreds of lines of second by second data of where I was and what my speed was. But by the way, to get this data, I had to actually send a LinkedIn in-mail to a person that I found who worked at the company because all of their online tools were broken. So, we're in a state where this data is being tracked by you. You could get it for yourself, but none of these companies are actually getting a lot of people asking them for their data, and they don't have the process set up to give it to anyone. It's a really interesting time.
Did it have location data in it?
100%. It had very specific and precise location data because, if you think about this, right, they want to see if you're doing 75 miles an hour on, the freeway where the limit is 70 miles an hour. That's not as bad as if you're in a 45 mile an hour zone and you're going 70 miles an hour. That seems pretty bad. So they are all tracking very specific lat long. They're doing it on a second by second basis. They're tracking braking events, ABS. They're tracking, deceleration to figure out if you're braking hard, all these other things. So they're tracking this data very specifically. And if you're not doing it through your car, don't have a newer car, they're trying to incentivize you to sign up and use their app to do so. So I think just most people don't realize this. In fact, when I tweeted about some of this stuff, and this is how I got in touch with the New York Times reporter who DM'd me about this, a lot of people were like, oh, I don't mind them tracking how fast I'm going. I don't speed that much. But people seem very against the lat long, the kind of location data, but not realizing you kind of need both sides of that for this to make sense for these insurance companies. And so people don't, I think, realize the extent to which this tracking is up.
It seems like in the process of either buying a car or signing up for insurance or downloading the app for said car or insurance, there's a terms of service where this could easily have been buried or will be buried that, everybody just says yes to. So it's probably something that, they've been covered for some time. I guess philosophically, just how do you feel about it? Like, do you feel like this is a real violation? Do you feel like this might be a net positive because, ultimately it will lead to, safer drivers having lower rates and reckless drivers having higher rates? Does this even matter because full self-driving is around the corner at some point in the next 5 or 10 years? How do you think about this?
I'm very conflicted on this, right? Like I want there to be more accountability. I don't want to have people driving 150 miles an hour in my neighborhood, like most folks. But I also worry that, at some point the switch flips from being opt-in to, this is the only way you get insurance. This is kind of like you're tracked everywhere. I also know, like we know from folks in the crypto space who have gotten hit by SIM swapping attacks, right? Like people get paid off at AT&T or Verizon to sell out their customers, right? Like there's a lot of incentive problems and just employee issues that end up where your data ends up being accessed. I think there was a great story, not a great story, but there was a story recently about, Tile, the kind of location tracking company that's owned by Life360, I think it is. Their law enforcement data request tool was compromised by a hacker, right? So like, there's a great story for you about like all the things that could go wrong. Now, to be clear, one of the issues, I've worked on privacy and safety quite a bit. You end up with this, privacy seems a lot like theoretical harms, with safety and trust and safety stuff is like actual harms. But I do think that as we go forward, like people don't think through where this stuff is inevitably going to go. And I think that's what I worry about. I worry about where it could go, and it could go there quite quickly.
And if you asked a consumer, hey, could we give your driving history to this insurance company and you might get lower rates? There would be nothing wrong with that. And a lot of consumers would just press the button, right? But doing it automatically, it opens up so many questions that certainly our laws aren't suited to deal with in the United States.
The other thing that was the case for me is like there's an incentive issue. The dealers are incentivized to get you through this process and sign you up, and they're not going to sit there in the car and explain to you what you're signing up for, to your point, Eric. So the accountability at all different needs to be at multiple points of this journey of like the people who could actually explain to you how it works. They're just not incentivized to do that today.
Yeah, when I installed my HP printer, it asked me if it was okay to use all of my data for advertising targeting, and there was no opt-out. And that was my turn into the Joker moment. That was it for me when my printer is spying on me, because my printer actually has sensitive information in it.
Well, I mean, your printer's been spying on you for a long time. If you, you can identify what printer printed out a piece of, a specific page. There's like hidden dots on the page that are printed. That's a another
printers
long
are the worst
story.
This is now the tinfoil hat episode.
The printers are really bad news.
EFF.org. Go check that out.
We're trying to make a photocopy of a dollar bill and see what happens. You also brought up this amazing story before we started recording this about a fake Meta customer service story. Now, at this point, I'm thinking, Rob, you should have like a TV show. Like you should be like one of those 1970s style, like the Hulk, where you go town to town solving privacy problems. I would watch that in a minute. So tell us about what happened with the Meta fake customer service number.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one because this was like all of the bad things about LLMs and hallucinations or whatever, data poisoning. Because so what happened was this guy in Canada, I guess he moved his Facebook account to a new phone, and his wife did a search to find the Meta customer support number because he was having some issues. And, did it with use actually the Meta AI in Facebook Messenger and asked them this question, like, what's a good number for Facebook customer support? Now, everyone knows that companies like Google, Meta, and others don't like to provide customer support. There are some phone numbers you can sometimes call, but you're not going to. So it provided a phone number. And by the way, I tested this. It wasn't only the Meta AI. I found this phone number in OpenAI. I found it in a bunch of different LLMs, provided as we think this is Meta's customer support number. So they called the number. And it ended up getting essentially scammed out of $500 because it's a completely fake phone number. It's a call center that pretends to be Meta customer service. And what they did is they seeded this number on a bunch of online platforms. Quora was one of them, where some commenter on Quora was like, someone asked, is this a real phone number? And they're like, oh, yes, this is the Facebook customer service number. They can help you with these items. This got sucked into these LLMs and over time became essentially like seen as the real customer service number. Now, when you're also have Meta putting their AI into WhatsApp, into Messenger, into a bunch of places, you now have this thing that completely end-to-end seems like the legitimate Facebook/Meta customer service number and led to a scam in this case.
And it's interesting that something like Quora, which you think of as being sort of an innocuous, web service, now is a security risk because it doesn't have the same sort of feedback tools that like Reddit does, where if you post something stupid on Reddit, there's going to be 50 people who tell you you're stupid and it'll get downvoted, etc. Whereas Quora is not very socially active. I love Quora because I'm an information junkie, but the amount of crap I find on it is extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly. It's when you boil something down to a chat interface and it's just giving you a response and it's not giving you a lot of other context, or you can't see who the people are behind something, you just lose. This context collapse, I think, is going to lead to a lot of problems. It already is. So, this is one of the many things that worries me about LLMs as they currently exist.
All right, this is a great conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with the news of the week, including the Trade Desk Yahoo standoff, Time Magazine licensing 100 years of content to OpenAI, and a bunch of other stuff. This podcast is sponsored by Adelaide. You've probably heard of Adelaide by now. This month, they announced a new product, Adelaide for Publishers. For the first time, publishers can leverage attention metrics to curate inventory, deliver attention insights, and drive higher CPMs. Join the Weather Company, NPR, Westwood One, Cumulus Media, and other leading publishers taking advantage of the attention economy's most popular metric, AU. Maybe one day Mark will convince me to sell guaranteed AU slots on Marketecture, but probably not. Check out AdelaideMetrics.com/AFP for more information.
And we're back. Thanks, everybody. Yes, on the docket for this week, we've got an interesting publisher OpenAI deal. We've got some M&A. We've got further TTD, Yahoo fallout, and a lot more. Let's take it from the top. So actually this morning, right before we recorded this, I saw this news. Time Magazine. Last year we had Time CEO Jess Sibley on the pod. You should listen to it. It was a great episode. They're like extremely forward leaning for a 101-year-old publisher. They announced a deal with OpenAI. And there's two things that are interesting on this one. So number one, Time Magazine is a 101-year-old company. And the 101 years of archives are now going to be ingested and used by OpenAI. So I think that's interesting. It's probably the first of its kind. And then number two, if you read the release and the piece, anytime Time will provide results for an OpenAI query, ChatGPT query, Time will be referenced and there'll be a link back to the source. So it's like kind of moving in an interesting direction that, arguably benefits publishers as a whole. Two things here. Number one, coming out of Cannes, and Brian Morrissey has been just like crushing this, with coverage. It seems to be at, the sort of like acceptance stage with publishers that these deals are just happening. And whether these deals are, get the bag today, I think you said that, Ari, a couple of weeks ago, TBD on tomorrow, or if this becomes a sustainable revenue source, I think that's a thing. But then number two, and Rob would like to sort of kind of hear your perspective on this. Like, what are the downstream impacts that we might not be thinking about as this undoubtedly changes, how people receive information?
Yeah, look, I think there's this interesting dichotomy now where people are paying for access to archives, and what's the current information, and when do you kind of hand off to something that's more current versus look at something historical? I think there's the other thing that I think was also really interesting is looking at historical data. Someone brought this up is old URLs that no longer point to the correct sources. Someone was saying how you can find those domains in the training data and go register them and then actually send people to fake sources. I think there's so many interesting things we just haven't thought through about how these things are going to interlock. I think we're in for some fun times, but also just wonder what the actual value of this data is. People are kind of estimating the value of this historical information. I have no idea what they're basing that on. I'd love to know. I'd love to see those spreadsheets, to be honest.
I have the most esoteric thought here, which is 101 years ago, it was 1923, and English was pretty different. How are they training the model on articles that are like, forsooth, hence, the flappers looking for their representation? Oh my. It's a pretty different way of writing and talking, and we're going to train these models to sound like they have a monocle and are anticipating the big run-up. I
think you may just have launched or given someone an idea to launch a new AI startup already. So
exactly, Monopoly Man,
Monocle Media. All right, what's your general view as these deals continue to happen with publishers? for publishers. Like get the bag today, we'll see what happens, kind of selling your soul in the process. How are you thinking about it?
I'd be questioning what happens at the end of the term of these agreements. So if we have a 2-year license, let's say for X millions of dollars a year, that's great. Hits the bottom line. It's 100% margin revenue. At the end of the 2 years, does the AI have to be untrained on that if they don't renew? Seems difficult to pull that off, if not impossible. So I wonder what the length of the contract even means in this case. That's my first question. Second question is, there was a news article, I don't think we covered on this. We talked about how Perplexity was raising the hackles of publishers because they're reproducing content. But there was a different story that the Perplexity bot is not respecting robots.txt. And the CEO came out and said things which are not reassuring, saying things like robots.txt isn't really a legal standard, it's just a tradition. And that made people pretty upset. So I do really wonder what the stick part of this carrot and stick relationship is going to look like.
I think you make a good point. On point one, and this is interesting stuff, we should talk about this. The New York Times, when they sued OpenAI, I think OpenAI said, okay, we will just remove New York Times from, everything and provide those results. So there probably is the ability to extract it after those 2 years if needed.
It could be, or it could be that they won't use it in the next model's training, and they assume the old models will go away at some point.
A lot of these are like they build another model on top. And so, as an example, going back to the Meta customer support number, the data's still in there. It's just they're looking for it and they're hiding it when you type in that query. So, this is the thing. It's kind of like layers upon layers of other models that you pretend we don't understand the other data versus retraining the entire model, which might be less feasible, actually.
And then on the point of the Perplexity CEO, last week or the week before, I think maybe when we were on Ken, the OpenAI CTO said something around creative and how, their products, inclusive of Sora, are probably going to, have a real impact on creatives and jobs. And I'm paraphrasing. She said something to the effect of, well, maybe those jobs shouldn't have existed in the first place. So I think there's definitely a clash happening between the leadership of some of these companies and how they view the future and what the current state is. You guys see that quote?
Yeah, this is like history repeating itself. There was a very famous moment where I think Sergey from Google or Larry said, our goal is to take $1 from an advertiser and turn it into results. And that sounds really smart to an engineering brain, but it sounded like a threat to everyone in the agency world. And that set Google back 5 years in terms of its ability to penetrate major advertising agencies. He also said some other things about them that was not very complimentary. And I feel like we're in a similar situation where the AI people are saying really stupid things that are going to hurt their business models for a while. And maybe they should chill out a little bit with the creative shouldn't exist and 95% of advertising agency jobs should be automated.
Yeah, but they're paying publishers. So there's that. So TTD and Yahoo, moving on, there was some drama with TTD saying Yahoo's inventory was outstream, but being classified as instream. And they threatened to and then proceeded to take it down from open marketplace bidding, which had, I think, a lot of controversy attached to it. And then they've further said that if Yahoo doesn't make certain changes, they're going to be removing it from PMPs. So effectively removing all Yahoo video from TTD. TTD's done this before, but it's never been public in terms of just turning off a given publisher, turning off a given ad tech partner. This has gotten very, very public. Yahoo is out there, appropriately saying this is incorrect. Why do we think that this is such a big deal? And what's, maybe some of the motivations behind it?
Yeah, I think Yahoo even said this is a very small amount of money involved, which makes sense. It's because it's a subset of their video on one buyer. I think this is resonating because, like any story that resonates, it reinforces the story we already had in our heads, which is that the trade desk is very powerful and is shaping the future of the internet through its decisions about where to spend money and also doing it publicly. A month ago, they put out what they called their premium internet list. That raised some hackles. The word premium is a very value-driven, loaded statement. If you weren't on the list, how did you feel? If you were on the list, you probably felt great. I think it really reinforces some of the worries that people have about their business practices, even though by all perception, this seems like they're acting in a fair manner, it still illustrates their power.
Total irony. Yahoo is on the Trade Desk top 100 publishers, by the way.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure they're one of the larger counterparties to the Trade Desk.
Yeah. On the other side of this, though, it's very clear that there's a difference between outstream and instream, and those should be assigned very different value from the buyer, and it should be transparent what the buyer's getting. So I kind of understand where TTD is coming from on this one.
Yeah, totally. And this is following up on standards work the IAP Tech Lab did to clarify very clearly what was what. And we spoke about that on this pod about 2 months ago when it first went through the system. And several commentators who know more than we do on Twitter were saying, this is a big deal. Watch out for the repercussions. So,
yeah, that's right. Rob, is this part of ad tech that, you keep an eye on still, or is this now the rigmarole that you saw a decade pass and you're happy to be past it?
I didn't miss some of these public discussions about quality and inventory and things like that. I still remember the old AppNexus Google kerfuffle and some of those fun ones. I don't miss any of these. That I'll be honest about that.
Your old company, Optimal, right?
Yeah.
It was not like an open web programmatic focused company, at least as I remember it. It was like a PMD.
In fact, it was initially. We pivoted. So we built a whole RTB stack ourselves, and we realized you needed a lot of money to do that well. And so we were doing it not super well. We actually had an agreement to sell that technology to a buyer, and then pivot ourselves entirely to the social ad side. But that deal fell through because they wanted a bunch of engineers. We're like, these engineers are going to work on this new business that we're going to do. We'll just sell you the technology. And they decided, an Amazon AWS RTB implementation wasn't worth the money and the time, and they didn't understand it well enough. So anyway, we moved on. And so, yeah, we sold the business based on being one of the top ad sellers, ad partners of Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and whatever. So, yeah.
I remember that. Okay, moving on. A little bit of M&A news and actually mostly M&A rumors this week. So first, shout out to Catherine Perloff from Adweek, who is like on it. Basically, she's finding all of these rumors out and having exclusives. So the first is that a couple of SSPs, Sonobi and 33 Across, both apparently are out for sale, and very similar businesses. Both have been at this for a while. Both are, call it $30-35 million revenue businesses, and seem to be out in the market. So does it seem like there's a little bit of like sort of more M than M&A happening out there, just given that there's, a lot of these subscale, and I don't say that in sort of a demeaning way. There's the cliff between Magnite and PubMatic and some of these other SSPs is quite deep. Do we think that's sort of kind of happening here or otherwise?
Let me, a quick, I don't want to say correction, but it's important to note that 33 Across at this point is largely a data business. So they have an ID bridging solution, which is, I think, either all of the revenue or the vast majority of the revenue. So I think they used to be an SSP and they've kind of pivoted away from that. So I think in general, we've been waiting for consolidation for many years and it's gone slower than everyone expected. You have a Lumascape with hundreds of logos and you have a market that's in some cases flat, in other cases declining. So naturally, there's nowhere to go if you're subscale. And I think that's really the story with Sonobi in particular. And it does follow very similar with Sharethrough being bought by Equitive. This side is under the most pressure of anyone, and the sandbox is probably really bad for the sell side, I think, from the way I kind of read the tea leaves. So I think we'll probably see more of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, another sort of rumor that Catherine reported was Claritas. When was the last time you thought about Claritas or heard about Claritas, by the way?
It's been a while. They're the ones that had like the really funny names for the segments, like the Bohemian Dads and the Drunk Moms and stuff like that.
Blue Blood Estates is the one I remember from the Prism clusters. Yeah.
That is good product marketing right there. That is, we still remember it 30 years probably after we first saw it.
I know. And sidebar, it's a company that was started in 1961. So this is a very mature business. Apparently the PE owners are shopping that or there's some interest around it. So the rumor mill is churning probably because everybody's coming back from Cannes. One deal that was announced that you flagged, and I think it's a neat one. So Beehive, which I think is the company that you do the Marketecture email on top of, yeah?
Yeah, we use it for our newsletter.
Yeah, so Beehive acquired actually a website company called TypeDream. And I think this is interesting from a couple perspectives, maybe three perspectives. Number one, Beehive's crushing it. Like, if you look at Beehive versus the competitive set, where the competitive set is other newsletter providers, now other like web providers, they're moving very, very fast and doing so in public. I give them a ton of credit. That's number one. Number two, I'm not familiar with the business, but TypeDream apparently will allow you to, within seconds, create an AI-based website. So this idea of have a modern newsletter platform connected to, a website, be able to extend, what you do is strategically really good. And then number three, we talk about product marketing. I recommend everybody check out the video on this, and the explanation and rationale behind why they did it and what a customer can expect was excellent. So this is a company everybody should keep an eye on. And I think they're doing really well.
Yeah, Beehive is a very hot company. They raised a Series B recently. I think if you zoom out, the story here is pretty interesting, which is there have been email newsletters for a long time, obviously, since the dawn of the web. And the tools that you use for those were often email service providers like MailChimp. And those tools aren't really good for it. They don't have monetization. They don't have really the metrics you want to see. There's a lot of things wrong with them. And then there's been a second kind of related approach, what I'd call the Substack or Medium approach, where Substack gives authors a lot of tools they want and the ability to monetize or to grow them inside, but leaning towards what I would call a social network approach. Like you have a Substack account as a consumer, which is meaningless to me personally. And there's a lot of things that are wrong with the way Substack is doing things. And then Beehive comes out of Morning Brew. They're all Morning Brew vets. And they just give newsletter providers or creators like exactly what they want, which is money. Basically, they have a marketplace of ads. You can put an ad in your newsletter with one click, make money. You could recommend other newsletters, make money. You could distribute yourself. It's really an ad network that is outside of what probably 90% of the people listening to this actually do. And it is, as a user, I'm just going to give it the biggest thumbs up possible. It is amazing.
Wow. That's high praise coming from you.
That is.
I hate everything.
I know.
By the way, there's one other thing that's I think interesting about these kinds of companies. There's like a few of these AI site builders out there, and I think it's hard to get these to be big companies without having to. You need to invest in things like deliverability and anti-abuse, because essentially these kinds of things get abused by spammers, and I've seen some of that. And if you're going to be part of a bigger company where deliverability of emails and other things are a focus, I think you can be much more successful from a product perspective than trying to reinvent the wheel. Some folks will have to reinvent the wheel, but you're going to see a bunch more consolidation, I guess, of these kinds of products or features.
If anyone listening to this knows Tyler, the CEO of Beehive, we want him on the podcast, so get me in touch. I'd appreciate it.
He is everywhere, so I would hope we can get to him. And his whole company seems to just be aligned with promoting all of this stuff. It's very impressive what they're doing. Anyway, we'll have one more before we call it a pod. So Brian Weiser, friend of the pod, had an interesting projection. So he thinks that digital will outpace TV for political ads this year for the first time ever in a biannual election. So $15 billion in spend, 46% digital versus only 38% in TV. I'm curious, or maybe you took a look at the breakdown. If you go further into digital, how much of that is social versus search versus, kind of CTV, or did he not break that out?
I didn't particularly look at that. I'd imagine it's dominated by Meta, TikTok, other social. Certainly it's the best way to reach hard to reach voters who might not be following the news, might not be watching the debate that's happening the evening we're recording this, etc.
Yeah. Rob, you had a funny anecdote on this?
So, my team built the ad library at Facebook Meta. And so one of the things we built is this ad library report that summarizes the top spenders. And, it's like a great place to see what's going on at a higher level. And so the top spenders are a bunch of Biden related advertisers right now in Meta for the last 30 days. But there's also what are the top keywords that people are searching for in the ad library? And so I think it shows that a lot of people are actually using Meta's ad library to find coupons and deals, because the top search results right now are Nike, Amazon, and free shipping. So I just thought that was kind of funny that, in years past, it might have been, related to the campaign. Obviously, Trump is still on the list, 5, 6 down. But, it's kind of funny that people are actually also using these ad transparency tools to find coupons and deals that are being advertised by brands. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Good opportunity to get in front of those advertisers.
Great. This is an awesome one. You want to call it here?
Rob Leathern, thank you for joining us and giving us your insight, and let us know when you walk into a dusty town and solve all their privacy problems.
Thanks, guys. Always fun to chat to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.